The rain was coming down in sheets that April evening when my entire world came crashing down with a simple notification sound from my phone. I was sitting in my home office in my cozy townhouse in Asheville, North Carolina, wrapping up some client work when I heard that familiar ping from our family group chat. Little did I know that this one message would shatter every illusion I had about the people I loved most in the world. My name is Emma Reynolds, and at 37 years old, I thought I had life pretty well figured out. I'd built a thriving digital marketing consultancy from the ground up, starting with nothing but determination and a laptop after graduating from college 15 years ago. The early days were tough, really tough, with ramen noodles for dinner and a studio apartment so small I could touch both walls if I stretched out my arms. But I persevered, and about 6 years ago, everything clicked into place. My business took off in ways I'd only dreamed about, and suddenly I was making more money than I'd ever imagined possible. The first thing I did when success finally came knocking was think about my parents. Mom and Dad had always struggled financially throughout my childhood. I remembered the worried looks they'd exchange when bills arrived, the way Mom would water down the milk to make it last longer, how Dad would work double shifts at the factory just to keep the lights on. They'd sacrifice so much to give my brother Tyler and me a decent life. So when I finally had the means, I didn't hesitate to start helping them out. It began small, just a few $100s here and there to help with unexpected expenses, but as my business grew, so did my contributions. Eventually, I settled into sending them $3,000 every single month, like clockwork. They were in their mid-60s now, and I wanted them to enjoy their retirement without the constant stress about money that had plagued their younger years. It felt good, being able to give back to the people who'd given me everything. That rainy April evening started like any other. I was reviewing a proposal for a new client, a local bakery looking to expand their online presence, when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and saw it was a message from Tyler in our family group chat. What I read made my blood run cold. Just sent another $3,000 to Mom and Dad, Tyler had written, followed immediately by a rolling eyes emoji. The family ATM is working overtime this month. I stared at the message, confused. Tyler didn't have that kind of money to send our parents. He worked as a bartender downtown and was always complaining about barely making ends meet. Before I could process what I was reading, another message popped up, this time from Dad. LOL, keep that gravy train running, son. Emma's too stupid to realize we're playing her like a fiddle. My hands started shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the phone. More messages flooded in rapidly, and with each one, I felt another piece of my heart break. Mom chimed in next. Just bought those designer golf clubs your father has been eyeing. Emma would have a cow if she knew her emergency fund money went to those instead of my blood pressure medication. She'd added several laughing emojis after that. The messages kept coming, an avalanche of betrayal that I couldn't stop reading, even though each word felt like a knife twisting in my gut. Tyler wrote, remember when she sent an extra $5,000 for Dad's heart procedure last year? That European cruise was incredible. My father responded, best acting job of my life. I even practiced limping for a week afterward to sell it. We should start a betting pool on how quickly she sends money when we mention medical bills, Tyler suggested. I say within 2 hours, max. You're on, Dad replied. My money's on 90 minutes. She's such a bleeding heart. I realized then that Tyler must have thought he was texting in some separate group chat they had without me. The messages kept flooding in, years' worth of deception laid bare in casual, mocking conversation. They talked about the vacations they'd taken with my money, the luxury items they'd purchased, the country club membership they'd maintained, all while telling me they were struggling to afford groceries and medication. My stomach churned as I scrolled through what seemed like an endless stream of lies. There was the time Mom claimed their car broke down and they needed $4,000 for repairs. According to the chat, they'd actually used it for a down payment on a newer model BMW. The roof leak that cost $6,000 to fix, that money had gone toward remodeling their kitchen with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. But it wasn't just the financial deception that gutted me. It was the cruel way they talked about me, their daughter who loved them unconditionally. They called me gullible, naive, pathetic. They mocked my generosity, laughed at my concern for their well-being, and plotted new ways to extract money from me like I was nothing more than a cash machine to them. She's practically begging to be taken advantage of. One message from my mother read, sometimes I almost feel bad. Almost. Don't go soft on me now, Helen, my father had replied. She can afford it. Besides, we raised her. We're just collecting on our investment. Tyler had added, it's basically reparations for having to grow up with her perfect little honor student act. Suddenly, Tyler must have realized his mistake because the messages started disappearing rapidly, but it was too late. I'd taken screenshots of everything, my fingers moving on autopilot while my mind struggled to process the magnitude of their betrayal. 3 years of messages, 3 years of them laughing behind my back while I worked myself to exhaustion to provide for them. I sat in my office chair, staring at the rain streaming down the windows, feeling completely numb. Every memory I had of helping my family was now tainted with the knowledge that they'd been mocking me the entire time. All those phone calls where mom would tearfully thank me for my help, telling me what a wonderful daughter I was? Lies. Dad's grateful hugs when I'd visit, him saying he didn't know what they'd do without me, all an act. The phone started ringing almost immediately. First Tyler, then mom, then dad. I let every call go to voicemail, not trusting myself to speak without completely falling apart. Text messages started flooding in next. "Emma, honey, you weren't supposed to see those messages," Mom texted. "We were just joking around. You know how we are." "Sis, I can explain everything," came from Tyler. "It's not what it looks like." Dad's approach was different. "Emma, you're taking this too seriously, so we had a little fun at your expense. It's what families do. Don't be so sensitive." I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to throw my phone against the wall and pretend the last hour hadn't happened. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I calmly walked to my laptop, logged into my online banking, and canceled the automatic transfer scheduled for the 1st of next month. Then I went through and removed my parents from my health insurance plan, which I'd added them to 3 years ago when Dad claimed his employer coverage was too expensive. The phone kept ringing. 23 missed calls in the first hour, 47 text messages. They ran the gamut from apologetic to angry to desperately pleading. I read each one, feeling more resolved with every manipulative word. "Emma, please, your father's heart medication is running low. We need this month's payment," Mom texted. 20 minutes later, when I hadn't responded, the tone changed. "You're really going to leave your elderly parents high and dry after everything we've done for you?" Tyler tried a different approach. I'm at their house right now. Mom's crying hysterically. Dad's blood pressure is through the roof. Is this really what you want?" I almost laughed at that one. Blood pressure issues from the stress of losing their cash cow, not from any actual medical condition. The irony wasn't lost on me. As the evening wore on, I found myself going through my financial records, adding up exactly how much I'd given them over the years. The monthly $3,000 for 6 years came to $216,000. The emergencies added another $60,000 at least. Over $250,000 gone. And for what? So they could laugh at my expense while living a lifestyle they hadn't earned? I thought about all the things I'd sacrificed to help them. The vacations I didn't take because I wanted to make sure they had enough. The house I'd put off buying for 2 extra years because I thought they needed help with their mortgage. The investment opportunities I'd passed up because my available capital was going to support my family. I'd been living well below my means, denying myself pleasures large and small, all so my parents could secretly live like royalty on my dime. The anger that had been simmering finally boiled over. I grabbed my phone and typed out a single message to the family group chat. "I've seen everything. Every cruel word, every lie, every scheme. The bank transfers stop immediately. The insurance coverage ends now. You're on your own. Don't contact me again." Then I blocked all 3 of their numbers. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in years, my phone wasn't buzzing with some request for money disguised as a family emergency. I sat in that silence, letting the reality of what I'd done wash over me. I'd just cut off my entire immediate family. The people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had been using me, and I'd finally said enough. As the rain continued to pound against the windows, I poured myself a glass of wine and tried to process the tsunami of emotions crashing over me. Anger, yes, but also profound sadness. Betrayal mixed with relief, guilt warring with righteousness. I'd lost my family tonight, but had they ever really been mine to begin with? Or had I just been their convenient ATM all along? The next morning brought a new wave of attempted contact. Since I'd blocked their phone numbers, they got creative. Emails started flooding in, each one a masterclass in manipulation tactics. Mom led with guilt, painting herself as a devoted mother who'd made one silly mistake. Dad went for anger, telling me I was ungrateful and selfish. Tyler tried to play the peacemaker, suggesting we all meet to talk things through like adults. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I forwarded the screenshots of their group chat messages to my email and saved them in multiple places. Something told me I'd need evidence of their cruelty in the days to come. By noon, they'd escalated to trying to reach me through social media. I found messages on Facebook, Instagram, even LinkedIn. The audacity of it all was breathtaking. They'd spent years mocking me in private, and now they expected me to just forgive and forget because they'd been caught. The entitlement was staggering. I decided I needed to talk to someone who could offer perspective without judgment. I called my best friend since college, Sarah Chen, who also happened to be a family law attorney. Sarah and I had been through everything together, from all-night study sessions to failed relationships to career triumphs. If anyone could help me navigate this situation, it was her. They did what? Sarah's voice was so loud through the phone that I had to pull it away from my ear. I just finished explaining the situation, forwarding her some of the screenshots as evidence. I can't believe it either, I said, feeling drained. 6 years, Sarah. 6 years of lying straight to my face while taking my money. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. This is financial abuse, plain and simple. They manipulated your love and generosity for their own gain. Sarah's voice softened with concern. How are you holding up? I thought about that for a moment. I don't know, I feel numb one minute and furious the next. Sometimes I want to call them and scream. Other times I want to pretend none of this ever happened. All of those feelings are valid, Sarah assured me. But Emma, before you make any decisions about future contact, we need to talk about the practical implications. Are they on any of your accounts, insurance policies? Do they have access to any of your financial information? My stomach dropped. I hadn't even thought about all the ways we were financially entangled beyond the monthly transfers. Oh God, they're beneficiaries on my life insurance policy, and I added them as authorized users on one of my credit cards for emergencies. Okay, don't panic. We'll make a list and systematically untangle everything. The credit card needs to be handled immediately. Call and have them removed as authorized users right now while I'm on the phone with you. I put Sarah on speaker and called my credit card company. As I waited on hold, she continued. After this, you'll need to change all your passwords, especially for anything financial. If they know your personal information, they could try to access your accounts. The credit card representative was helpful, immediately removing my parents from the account and issuing me a new card number. One task down, but I knew there were many more to come. Over the next hour, Sarah helped me create a comprehensive list of everything that needed to be addressed. Life insurance beneficiaries, health insurance dependents, the joint savings account I'd opened with my mother years ago for emergencies, even the Netflix password they were using. The list was longer than I'd realized. Emma, there's something else you need to consider, Sarah said gently. The investment account you mentioned setting up for their future care, what's the status on that? I groaned. I'd completely forgotten about that account. 3 years ago, I'd started putting aside an additional $1,000 each month into an investment account meant to supplement their retirement. I'd planned it as a surprise for their 70th birthdays. The balance was sitting at around $45,000. Is it in your name or theirs? Sarah asked. Mine, thank God. I wanted to manage the investments myself and present it to them when it reached a certain amount. Good, that makes things easier. You can decide what to do with that money without any legal complications. Maybe use it for something that actually benefits you for a change? The thought was novel, money earmarked for my own benefit instead of theirs. I don't even know what I'd do with it, I admitted. I've been so focused on taking care of them that I've forgotten how to take care of myself. Well, maybe it's time to remember, Sarah suggested. When was the last time you took a real vacation? Or bought something just because you wanted it, not because you needed it? I couldn't answer because I honestly couldn't remember. After ending the call with Sarah, I spent the rest of the day methodically severing financial ties with my family. Each action felt like cutting another thread in the fabric that had bound us together. With every account closed or beneficiary changed, I felt a strange mix of liberation and loss. That evening, I heard a car pull into my driveway. Through the window, I could see Tyler's beat-up Honda Civic. He sat in the car for several minutes, probably gathering courage before finally approaching my door. I watched him through the peephole as he raised his hand to knock, hesitated, then knocked anyway. Emma, I know you're home. Your car's in the driveway. He called through the door. Please just give me 5 minutes. I drove all the way from Charlotte. Charlotte was 2 hours away. The fact that he'd made that drive on a weeknight told me how desperate they were getting. I debated ignoring him, but something in his tone made me reconsider. Maybe it was morbid curiosity about what excuse he'd concocted. Maybe it was the lingering hope that somewhere in there was still the little brother I'd helped with homework and protected from bullies. I opened the door but kept the chain on. "You have 5 minutes." Tyler looked terrible. His usually stylish hair was disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed. Please, can I come in? It's starting to rain again." "You can talk from there." He sighed, shoulders slumping. "Okay, I deserve that. Look, I know what you saw in those messages was horrible. There's no excuse for it. But you have to understand, Mom and Dad, they kind of sucked me into it. It started small, just little jokes, and then it snowballed." Snowballed? I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. "Tyler, there were 3 years of messages. 3 years of you all calling me stupid, gullible, pathetic. That's not snowballing. That's an avalanche of cruelty." I know. He ran his hands through his hair. "I'm not proud of it, but there are parents. They're freaking out right now. Mom hasn't stopped crying. Dad's talking about having to sell the house." The house I helped pay for while living in a one-bedroom apartment because I thought they were struggling? Tyler winced. "Yeah, about that." "No," I cut him off. "I don't want to hear it. Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed? Do you know I've been shopping at thrift stores while Mom's been buying designer clothes with my money? I've been driving a 10-year-old car while Dad's been upgrading his every 2 years? I've been eating pasta 5 nights a week to save money while you've all been dining at country clubs?" I'm not finished," I said, my voice rising. "You participated in this. You laughed along. You called me the family ATM like I was some machine and not your sister. You made bets about how quickly I'd send money when you lied about emergencies. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel?" Tyler's face crumpled. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was stupid and cruel, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. But, they're drowning without your help. They've been living beyond their means for years, counting on your money. The mortgage, the country club fees, Dad's golf club memberships, Mom's shopping habits, they can't afford any of it without you. Then they'll have to learn to live within their means like the rest of us," I said flatly. "You don't understand. They're going to lose everything. No, Tyler, they're going to lose the lifestyle they've been funding with my money. There's a difference. They'll still have their Social Security, Dad's pension from the factory, their savings, whatever's left of it. They'll have to downsize, budget, make sacrifices, like normal people do." Tyler tried one more angle. "What about me? I'm caught in the middle here. I'm living in their garage because I can't afford my own place. If they lose the house, I'm homeless." I stared at him, really looked at him for the first time in years. 29 years old, still depending on our parents, still making excuses, still trying to manipulate me into fixing everyone else's problems. "You're a grown man, Tyler. Maybe it's time you figured out your own life instead of conspiring with our parents to leech off mine." His face flushed with anger. "That's rich coming from you. You think you're so much better than us because you have money? You've always been a self-righteous—" I closed the door in his face. I didn't need to hear the rest. The mask had slipped, and he'd shown me who he really was. Not my beloved little brother, but another manipulator who saw me as nothing more than a means to an end. Through the door, I could hear him pounding and yelling, "This isn't over, Emma. You can't just abandon your family. We'll contest any changes you make. We'll sue if we have to." Sue for what? For cutting off voluntary financial support? For refusing to be their cash cow anymore? The threat was as empty as their supposed love for me. I walked away from his door, leaving him to ran at the rain. The next few days passed in a blur of legal consultations and financial restructuring. Sarah connected me with colleagues who specialized in various areas I needed help with. I met with a financial advisor to reorganize my accounts and investments. I consulted with another attorney about the potential for any legal challenges for my family, though he assured me they had no grounds to stand on. The money I'd given them had been gifts, freely given, and I had no legal obligation to continue. What surprised me most during this time was how many people had similar stories. My financial advisor mentioned that family financial abuse was more common than most people realized. The attorney shared statistics about how often successful individuals were exploited by relatives. Even the banker who helped me restructure my accounts confided that she'd had to cut off a sibling who'd been taking advantage of her success. I wasn't alone in this experience, and somehow that made it slightly more bearable. A week after I'd blocked my family, I received a certified letter. My hand shook as I opened it, expecting some kind of legal threat. Instead, it was a handwritten letter from my mother, delivered through the postal service since I'd blocked all digital communication. My dearest Emma, it began, and I could practically hear her practiced, tearful voice in the words. I've been unable to sleep or eat since this terrible misunderstanding drove us apart. Your father and I are devastated by the pain we've caused you. We never meant for those foolish messages to hurt you. We were just being silly, the way families joke with each other. You know how we've always used humor to cope with life's challenges? The truth is, we're terrified, not just of losing the financial support, but of losing you. You're our daughter, our pride and joy. Yes, we've accepted your generosity, perhaps too eagerly, but only because we were so proud that our little girl had become successful enough to share her blessings with us. Your father's health really is fragile. The stress of this estrangement has caused his blood pressure to spike dangerously. He's been to the emergency room twice this week. I've enclosed the medical bills, not to ask for money, but so you can see we're telling the truth about his condition. Please, Emma, let's meet and talk this through. We're willing to do whatever it takes to repair our relationship. Family counseling, financial counseling, anything. Just please don't cut us out of your life completely. With all our love, Mom, I examined the enclosed medical bills carefully. They were real, from a legitimate hospital. But as I looked closer, I noticed the diagnosis was stress-related hypertension, and the treatment was lifestyle modification and stress reduction. In other words, Dad was stressed about losing his cash flow, and the doctor told him to calm down. The bill was for less than $500, a far cry from the thousands they used to claim for his various phantom ailments. I filed the letter away with the screenshots, evidence of their continuing manipulation. The tears, the declarations of love, the subtle inclusion of medical bills, it was all calculated to push my buttons and get the money flowing again. 2 days later, I heard from an unexpected source. My Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister, called from Phoenix. We'd never been close. Family drama had kept that side of the family at arm's length. But I answered out of curiosity. Emma, honey, I heard about what's happening with your parents. She began without preamble. I wanted you to know that I support whatever decision you've made. I was stunned. You do? Patricia laughed, but it was a bitter sound. Oh, honey, your mother and I haven't spoken in 5 years because of a similar situation. She convinced me to invest in some scheme of your father's, swore it was a sure thing. I lost $30,000 and never saw a penny back. When I asked them to repay even part of it, Helen said families shouldn't expect repayment for gifts. I had no idea, I said, sinking into my couch. Of course you didn't. Helen's very good at controlling the narrative. Let me guess. Growing up, you rarely saw my side of the family? Always had some excuse why we couldn't visit? She was right. I could count on one hand the times I'd seen my aunt and cousins growing up. They always said you were too busy, or there was family drama. The drama was that I finally saw them for who they really were. Users, manipulators. They've been running cons on family members for decades, Emma. You're just their biggest score. We talked for an hour, and Patricia filled in so many blanks from my childhood. The relatives who'd suddenly stopped visiting, the family friends who'd mysteriously disappeared from our lives. All people who'd eventually seen through my parents' manipulation and been cut off for refusing to play along. I'm proud of you for breaking free, Patricia said before hanging up. It takes real strength to stand up to them. Don't let them guilt you into going back. They'll never change. Her words echoed in my mind as I continued the process of disentangling my life from theirs. Each day brought new attempts at contact, new strategies to break through my defenses. They tried everything: anger, guilt, love bombing, even recruiting flying monkeys. Mutual acquaintances who'd reach out on their behalf. One particularly creative attempt came from Mrs. Morrison, our elderly neighbor from my childhood home. She called on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice shaky with age and concern. Emma, dear, I'm worried about your parents, she began. Your mother came by yesterday in tears. She says there's been some kind of misunderstanding and you won't speak to them. Your father looks terrible, thin and gray. Whatever's happened, surely it can be worked out. They're not getting any younger, you know. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. Mrs. Morrison, I appreciate your concern, but this situation is more complex than my parents have led you to believe. I've made my decision for very good reasons, and I need you to respect that. But dear, they're your parents. You only get one set of those. You're right, I agreed. And the set I got spent years lying to me, stealing from me, and mocking me behind my back. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away from toxic people, even if they're family. There was a long pause. Oh my, I had no idea. Your mother made it sound like a simple disagreement over money. It's not about money, Mrs. Morrison. It's about betrayal, disrespect, and emotional abuse. I'm protecting myself. After I hung up, I realized something important. Each time I explained my position, each time I stood firm in my decision, I felt stronger. The guilt that had initially plagued me was fading, replaced by a sense of righteous conviction. I had done nothing wrong. I had been generous, loving, and supportive. They had chosen to exploit that. The consequences were theirs to bear. 3 weeks after the initial revelation, I decided to take Sarah's advice about self-care. I booked a consultation with a therapist who specialized in family trauma and financial abuse. Dr. Rebecca Martinez came highly recommended, and from our first session, I understood why. "Tell me what brings you here today," she said, her voice warm and non-judgmental. I started with the group chat incident and worked backward, unraveling 6 years of financial support and a lifetime of family dynamics. Dr. Martinez listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly just letting me talk. By the end of the session, I felt emotionally wrung out, but somehow lighter. "Emma, what you're describing is a classic case of financial abuse combined with emotional manipulation," she said. "Your family created a dynamic where your worth was tied to what you could provide for them financially. When that source was threatened, they responded not with genuine remorse, but with escalating manipulation tactics." "But they're my family," I said, echoing words that had been drummed into me since childhood. "Aren't I supposed to help family?" "Helping family is admirable when it's appreciated and when it's reciprocal in some way, not necessarily financially, but emotionally, respectfully. What you're describing isn't help, it's exploitation. There's a significant difference." We scheduled weekly sessions, and each one helped me peel back another layer of dysfunction. I learned about enmeshment, about how my parents had trained me from childhood to be their caretaker. I discovered how they'd used intermittent reinforcement, occasional shows of affection and appreciation to keep me hooked on seeking their approval. Most importantly, I learned that setting boundaries wasn't cruel or selfish. It was necessary for my own mental and emotional health. During my 4th week of therapy, Dr. Martinez asked a question that stopped me cold. "Emma, if a friend came to you with this exact situation, their family was stealing from them, mocking them, manipulating them, what would you advise them to do?" The answer was immediate and obvious. I'd tell them to cut those people off immediately, to protect themselves. So why is it different when it's you? I sat with that question for a long time. The answer, when it came, was painful in its simplicity, because I was taught that my needs don't matter as much as theirs. And who taught you that? They did. The breakthrough was profound. I'd been operating under programming installed by the very people who were exploiting me. They'd raised me to be their personal ATM, training me from childhood that my value lay in what I could provide for them. The group chat messages weren't a departure from how they saw me. They were just the first time I'd seen their true perspective. As therapy continued, other areas of my life began to improve. Without the constant stress of managing my family's manufactured crises, I found I had more energy for my business. I took on exciting new clients, developed innovative strategies, and even started considering expansion opportunities I'd previously dismissed as too risky. The money I'd been sending to my parents was now going into my own savings and investments, and for the first time, I was planning for my own future rather than subsidizing theirs. I also found my other relationships deepening. Friends I'd been too busy or stressed to see regularly were delighted when I started reaching out more. I joined a hiking club and made new connections with people who shared my interests. I even started dating again, something I'd put on the back burner for years because I was too focused on family obligations. Marcus, a fellow entrepreneur I met at a networking event, was particularly understanding when I eventually shared my family situation. "I went through something similar with my brother," he told me over coffee one afternoon. He expected me to fund his lifestyle because my tech startup succeeded while his didn't. It took me years to realize that his failures weren't my responsibility to fix. "How did you handle it?" I asked. Set clear boundaries, told him I'd help him find resources for job training or education, but I wouldn't give him any more money. He was furious at first, called me every name in the book. But you know what? 2 years later, he'd gotten his act together, found a decent job, and was supporting himself. Sometimes the best help you can give someone is forcing them to help themselves. His words resonated deeply. Maybe, just maybe, cutting my family off financially would force them to take responsibility for their own lives. Or maybe not. Either way, it wasn't my problem to solve anymore. 2 months after the incident, the attempts at contact had slowed but not stopped. I'd received a few more letters, each more desperate than the last. Tyler had apparently moved out of our parents' garage after a fight about contributing to household expenses. Mom and Dad were indeed selling their house, downsizing to a modest apartment. The country club membership was gone, along with the expensive cars and designer clothes. Part of me felt satisfaction at seeing them face the consequences of their choices. Another part, smaller but still present, felt sad for the life they'd lost. But I reminded myself that they'd built that life on a foundation of lies and exploitation. It was never sustainable, and it was never really theirs. One evening, I was reviewing financial reports when an unknown number called. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Emma? It's Kevin Chen, Tyler's friend from college. Please don't hang up. I remembered Kevin vaguely, a quiet guy who'd sometimes hung around when Tyler visited during school breaks. What do you want, Kevin? I wanted to apologize. Tyler told me everything, showed me some of the messages. I had no idea that's how your family was treating you. It's disgusting, and I told him so. I appreciate that, but why are you calling me? Kevin hesitated. Because Tyler's spiraling. He's couch surfing, drinking too much, and blaming everyone but himself for his situation. I've tried to help him see that he needs to take responsibility, but he won't listen. I thought maybe if you knew... Kevin, I interrupted gently. Tyler is a grown man. His choices and their consequences are his to manage. I can't save him from himself, and frankly, I don't want to anymore. I get it, Kevin said. I just thought you should know. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing cutting them off. Family shouldn't treat family that way. After we hung up, I sat with the information about Tyler. Once upon a time, I would have immediately jumped into action, trying to fix his problems. Probably sending money to help him get back on his feet. Now, I recognize that pattern for what it was. Enabling disguised as love. Tyler had participated in mocking and manipulating me for years. If he was struggling now, it was because he'd lost his safety net. Not because of anything I'd done. As summer turned to fall, my new life without family drama had settled into a comfortable rhythm. I'd redecorated my home office with some of the money I was no longer sending to my parents, creating a space that truly inspired me. I'd taken a vacation to Costa Rica, something I'd dreamed about for years but never felt I could afford. I'd even started volunteering with a financial literacy program for young adults, teaching skills that might help others avoid the kind of exploitation I'd experienced. The investment account I'd secretly maintained for my parents' future care had been repurposed into a scholarship fund for first-generation college students from low-income families. It felt appropriate, helping young people who were actually trying to better themselves rather than funding the comfortable lifestyle of manipulators. The first recipient, a brilliant young woman named Maria studying engineering, had sent me a thank you letter that made me cry happy tears rather than frustrated ones. I'd also reconnected with Patricia and that side of the family. It turned out I had cousins I'd never really known, aunts and uncles who'd been painted as villains in my mother's narratives, but were actually lovely people who'd simply refused to be exploited. Building these relationships helped fill some of the family-shaped hole in my life, though I was learning that chosen family, friends who truly cared about me, could be just as fulfilling as blood relations. One October afternoon, I was grabbing lunch at my favorite cafe when I saw a familiar figure at a corner table. My mother sat alone, staring into a cup of coffee. She looked older, grayer, wearing clothes I recognized from years ago rather than her usual designer outfits. For a moment, our eyes met across the room. I watched her face cycle through emotions. Surprise, hope, anger, sadness. She half rose from her chair as if to approach me, then seemed to think better of it. Instead, she simply nodded, a small acknowledgement of my presence. I nodded back, then turned to the counter to place my order. As I waited for my sandwich, I could feel her eyes on me. The old Emma would have felt compelled to go over, to try to make peace, to fix things. But I'd learned that some things couldn't be fixed, and more importantly, that it wasn't my job to fix them. I took my order to go, walking past her table without a word. She didn't try to stop me. That evening, I found an email from her in a folder I'd set up to automatically filter family messages. I couldn't quite bring myself to block their emails entirely, though I rarely checked the folder. The subject line read simply, "I saw you today." Emma, seeing you today, looking so well, so confident, made me realize something. We did raise a successful, capable daughter. We just forgot to appreciate her for who she is rather than what she could provide. I won't ask for forgiveness because I know we don't deserve it. I won't ask for money because I finally understand that was never what this should have been about. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. The damage we did, the trust we broke, the daughter we lost through our own greed and cruelty. Your father doesn't know I'm writing this. He's still angry, still believing we're the victims here. But I know better. We're living in a small apartment now, getting by on Social Security and his pension. It's not the life we'd grown accustomed to, but it's the life we can actually afford. Maybe that's a lesson we needed to learn. I hope you're happy. I hope you're building the life you deserve, surrounded by people who value you for more than your bank account. And I hope someday, when the pain isn't so fresh, you might find some peace about all of this. Mom. I read the email 3 times, looking for the hook, the manipulation, the ask. But it seemed, for once, to be simply what it appeared, an acknowledgement of wrongdoing without expecting anything in return. I didn't reply. I wasn't ready for that, might never be ready. But I did move it to a separate folder, something to perhaps revisit when more time had passed. As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on how much had changed since that rainy April evening. I'd lost the family I thought I had, but in the process, I discovered they'd never really been the family I'd believed them to be. The pain of that revelation had been overwhelming at first, but it had also been liberating. For the first time in my adult life, I was living for myself. My money was my own. My choices were my own. My future was my own to shape without the constant drain of supporting people who didn't appreciate or respect me. It had been a painful journey, but I was finally free from the role they'd assigned me. The family ATM, too stupid to realize she was being used. As it turned out, I wasn't stupid at all. I'd just been loving, trusting, and generous with the wrong people. Now I knew better. And while I couldn't get back the money or the years I'd spent in service to their deception, I could make sure that every day going forward was lived on my own terms. The autumn rain began pattering against my bedroom window, gentler than that April storm that had changed everything. But this time, instead of bringing destruction, the sound was soothing, like nature's way of washing away the old to make room for the new. I fell asleep to that sound, grateful for the hard lesson learned and the freedom it had brought. My phone, sitting on the nightstand, remained blissfully silent. No emergencies, no manipulations, no requests for money disguised as family love. Just peaceful quiet and the promise of a tomorrow that belonged entirely to me. That's the thing about cutting toxic people out of your life. It hurts at first, like surgery to remove something that's poisoning you. But once you heal, once you learn to live without that constant source of pain and drain, you realize how sick you really were, and you promise yourself, never again. Never again will you let someone use your love against you. Never again will you fund someone else's life at the expense of your own. Never again will you be anyone's ATM. I was Emma Reynolds, successful businesswoman, generous friend, and recovering family ATM. And for the first time in my life, that was more than enough. The months that followed brought unexpected moments of clarity and growth. The holiday season, which I dreaded, turned out to be surprisingly peaceful. Instead of the usual drama-filled family gatherings where I'd inevitably be hit up for money, Dad would need new winter tires, Mom would tearfully mention the broken washing machine, Tyler would have some crisis that required immediate cash. I spent Thanksgiving with Sarah and her family, who welcomed me with open arms and asked for nothing but my presence and a side dish. Christmas was spent volunteering at a homeless shelter, serving meals to people who were actually struggling, not just pretending to be. The gratitude in their eyes for a simple hot meal and a kind word stood in stark contrast to my family's entitled demands for thousands of dollars. It was humbling and healing in equal measure. I'd expected to feel guilty and alone during the holidays, but instead, I felt purposeful and connected to my community in ways I'd never experienced before. When New Year's Eve arrived, I found myself at a party thrown by one of my new hiking club friends, surrounded by people who knew me as Emma the entrepreneur, Emma the hiking enthusiast, Emma the friend, not Emma the money source. As midnight approached and everyone began the countdown, Marcus stood beside me, raising his champagne glass. "To new beginnings," he said softly, his eyes warm with understanding. "To freedom," I replied, clinking my glass against his. When the clock struck 12 and cheers erupted around us, I felt a weight I hadn't even realized I was still carrying finally lift from my shoulders. The previous year had been one of the hardest of my life, but also one of the most transformative. I'd learned to value myself for more than what I could provide financially. I'd learned that love shouldn't come with a price tag. Most importantly, I'd learned that family isn't defined by blood but by mutual respect, genuine care, and reciprocal support. My phone buzzed with New Year messages from real friends, people who celebrated my successes without calculating how they could profit from them. There were no messages in the family folder. They'd finally, it seemed, gotten the hint that I was serious about no contact. Or perhaps they'd simply found new targets for their schemes. Either way, it was no longer my concern. January brought new challenges and opportunities in my business. Without the constant emotional and financial drain of my family's manufactured crises, I found I had the mental bandwidth to take on more ambitious projects. I landed a contract with a major retail chain to revamp their entire digital marketing strategy. A project that would have seemed overwhelming just a year ago, but now felt exciting and manageable. I also started dating Marcus more seriously. He understood my family situation because he'd lived through something similar, and he never pushed me to reconcile or made me feel guilty about maintaining boundaries. When Valentine's Day rolled around, he surprised me, not with expensive gifts, but with a thoughtfully planned day hiking to a waterfall I'd mentioned wanting to see, followed by a picnic he'd prepared himself. It was perfect in its simplicity and genuine care, the exact opposite of the transactional relationships I'd grown up with. By spring, a full year after the group chat incident, I had built a life I was genuinely proud of. My business was thriving, with 2 new employees hired to handle the expanding client base. My personal relationships were healthy and fulfilling. My bank account, no longer depleted by monthly transfers and emergency requests, had grown to a point where I could consider buying a larger home. Something with a proper garden and a home office that wasn't just a converted spare bedroom. I was touring a beautiful craftsman-style house with my real estate agent when my phone rang with an unfamiliar local number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Is this Emma Reynolds?" a professional voice asked. "Yes, who is this?" "This is Nancy Williams from Sunset Manor Assisted Living. I'm calling because your father, Robert Reynolds, has listed you as his emergency contact. He was admitted to the hospital yesterday with a mild heart attack." I felt my breath catch. Despite everything, hearing that my father was in the hospital sparked an automatic concern. "Is he okay?" "He's stable and expected to make a full recovery. However, he'll need some lifestyle changes and possibly rehabilitation care. He asked us to call you." I was quiet for so long that Nancy asked if I was still there. "I am," I said wanly, "but I need to clarify something. My father and I are estranged. I'm not in a position to make medical or financial decisions for him." "I see," Nancy said, her tone remaining professional. "Would you like me to relay any message to him?" I thought about it. A year ago, I would have rushed to the hospital, checkbook in hand, ready to pay for whatever he needed. 6 months ago, I might have sent money anonymously. But now? Now I recognize this for what it likely was. Another manipulation, another attempt to use a real or exaggerated medical issue to reestablish contact and restart the flow of money. "Please tell him I hope he recovers quickly," I said finally. "But he'll need to make other arrangements for his care. I won't be involved." After I hung up, I stood in the sunny kitchen of the house I was viewing, waiting to feel guilty or anxious. Instead, I felt resolved. My father had health insurance, Medicare, plus the supplemental insurance he'd always had through his pension. He had my mother and Tyler to help him. He didn't need me. He wanted access to my resources. There was a crucial difference. I turned to my real estate agent, who'd been politely examining the granite countertops while I took the call. "I think this is the one," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "Let's make an offer." That evening, I called Dr. Martinez for an impromptu therapy session. We'd moved to monthly check-ins, but this felt like something I needed to process with professional help. "How do you feel about your decision regarding your father's hospitalization?" she asked after I'd explained the situation. "Conflicted," I admitted, "but not as much as I expected. I feel sad that he's unwell, but I don't feel responsible for fixing it. Is that wrong?" "Let me ask you this. If a stranger on the street had a heart attack, would you feel personally responsible for their medical care?" "No, of course not." "Your father became a stranger the moment he chose to treat you as an ATM rather than a daughter. The biological connection doesn't create an obligation to accept abuse or exploitation. You can feel compassion for his situation without taking responsibility for it." Her words resonated deeply. I could hold space for both truths, that it was sad my father was ill, and that his illness didn't obligate me to re-enter an abusive dynamic. The next few days brought the expected escalation. Calls from unknown numbers that I didn't answer. Messages from cousins I hadn't heard from in years, suddenly concerned about family unity. Even a registered letter from my mother that I returned unopened. I'd learned to recognize the patterns of manipulation, and I wasn't going to engage. A week later, Sarah told me she'd been contacted by someone claiming to be my mother's attorney, inquiring about whether I could be legally compelled to provide financial support. Sarah had shut that down quickly, explaining that adult children have no legal obligation to support their parents financially unless specific circumstances apply, none of which did in this case. They're getting desperate, Sarah told me over lunch. The fact that they're trying legal angles means they've exhausted the emotional manipulation tactics. Let them waste money on lawyers, I said, surprising myself with my indifference. Money they could be using for Dad's medical care, ironically. My offer on the house was accepted, and I threw myself into planning the move. It felt symbolic. I was literally moving forward, creating a new space that had never been tainted by my family's manipulation. As I packed up my townhouse, I came across a box of family photos I'd shoved in a closet months ago. I sat on the floor, looking through them with the strangest sense of detachment. There was 5-year-old me, grinning gap-toothed at the camera while my parents smiled behind me. 10-year-old me at Tyler's birthday party. High school graduation, college graduation, the day I launched my business. In every photo, we looked like a happy, normal family. But now I could see what I'd missed before. The calculating look in my mother's eyes when she gazed at my graduation honors, my father's possessive hand on my shoulder at my business launch party, Tyler's smirk in photos from recent years. They'd been planning this for so long, grooming me to be their financial salvation. Every achievement of mine had been viewed through the lens of what it could provide for them. It was chilling to realize how calculated it all had been. I kept one photo, me at about 7, playing in the garden, alone and carefree, before I understood my role in their lives, before the grooming began. The rest went into the donation box. Someone else might enjoy these remnants of a family that had never really existed outside of my wishful thinking. Moving day arrived with the kind of perfect spring weather that felt like nature's blessing on new beginnings. Friends showed up to help. Sarah and her husband Marcus, people from my hiking club, even some clients who'd become friends. As we carried boxes and furniture into my new home, I was struck by the realization that I had built a chosen family, one based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than obligation and manipulation. That evening, after everyone had left and I was alone in my new home, I walked through each room with a sense of ownership I'd never felt before. This house was mine, purchased with money I'd earned, and decorated to my tastes without worrying about anyone else's opinions or needs. The spare bedrooms wouldn't be holding areas for family members who needed a place to crash. The home office wouldn't be where I stressed over how to cover everyone else's expenses. This was my space, my sanctuary, my fresh start. I was hanging pictures in the living room when my phone buzzed with a notification from my banking app. Someone had tried to access my account using an old password. The attempt had been blocked, but it was a reminder that my family hadn't given up. I made a mental note to do another security review with my financial advisor, maybe even look into identity protection services. If they were desperate enough to try hacking my accounts, I needed to be vigilant. That night, I hosted a small housewarming dinner for my closest friends. As we sat around my new dining table, sharing food and laughter, Sarah raised her glass. To Emma, who learned that sometimes the best family is the one you choose for yourself. Everyone clinked glasses, and I felt tears prick my eyes. Happy tears this time. Looking around the table at these people who supported me without condition, who celebrated my successes without calculating their cut, who offered help without expecting repayment, I understood what family was supposed to feel like. Later, as I cleaned up after everyone had gone home, I found myself humming, something I hadn't done in years. The constant anxiety that had been my companion for so long had finally released its grip. I was free to be happy without worrying about who would try to exploit that happiness. I was free to succeed without calculating how much of that success I'd have to give away. I was free to be myself without apology or payment. The house felt peaceful in the quiet evening, full of possibility and free from the ghosts of manipulation past. I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped out onto the back deck, looking up at the stars barely visible through the light pollution of the city. Somewhere out there, my biological family was living with the consequences of their choices. Maybe they'd learned something from the experience. Maybe they hadn't. Maybe Tyler was still blaming everyone else for his problems while my parents schemed to find a new mark. But that wasn't my story anymore. My story was here, in this house I'd bought with my own success, surrounded by people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. My story was about breaking generational patterns of manipulation and exploitation. My story was about learning that love shouldn't cost anything, but should be freely given and received. A shooting star streaked across the sky, and out of habit, I started to make a wish. Then I stopped, laughing softly at myself. What was there to wish for? I had everything I needed: self-respect, genuine relationships, professional success, and hard-won wisdom about my own worth. The family ATM had been permanently decommissioned, and in its place stood a woman who knew her value extended far beyond her bank account. It had been a painful transformation, but looking at where I stood now versus where I'd been that awful April evening, I wouldn't change a thing. Every betrayal had led to a revelation. Every loss had created space for something better. Every tear had watered the seeds of a new life. As I headed inside to my new home, my phone remained silent. No crises, no emergencies, no manipulations. Just peaceful quiet and the promise of a future I was building on my own terms. The girl who'd been groomed to give everything away had grown into a woman who knew exactly what she was worth, and it was priceless. 6 months into living in my new home, I'd established routines that felt nurturing rather than draining. Saturday mornings were for the farmer's market, where I'd become friendly with the vendors who now knew me by name. Sunday afternoons were reserved for meal prep, filling my kitchen with the aroma of roasting vegetables and simmering soups. Cooking for one, but no longer feeling alone. The spare bedroom I'd converted into a yoga and meditation space had become my sanctuary, a place where I could center myself whenever the old patterns of guilt tried to creep back in. My business had expanded beyond my wildest dreams. The major retail contract had led to 3 more significant clients, and I'd hired 2 additional team members. We'd moved into a proper office space downtown, and I loved the energy of building something meaningful with people who respected professional boundaries. There were no guilt trips about working late, no manipulation tactics during salary negotiations, just honest communication and mutual respect. Marcus and I had grown closer, our relationship deepening in ways I hadn't thought possible. He understood my triggers, why I sometimes tensed up when he offered to pay for dinner, why surprise gifts made me uncomfortable at first, why I needed to maintain financial independence even as we grew more committed. His patience and understanding had helped me learn that healthy relationships could exist without transaction, that love didn't require payment. One autumn evening, as I was reviewing quarterly reports in my home office, I heard a knock at the door. Through the peephole, I saw a young woman I didn't recognize, holding what appeared to be a manila envelope. Cautiously, I opened the door with the chain still on. "Emma Reynolds?" she asked, her voice nervous. "Yes?" "I'm Jessica Martinez. I'm your cousin, Patricia's daughter." I studied her face and could see the family resemblance to my aunt. Slowly, I undid the chain and opened the door fully. "Jessica, I remember you. We met briefly at that family reunion when we were kids." She nodded, shifting nervously. "Could I come in? I have something I think you should see." We sat in my living room, and Jessica pulled out a stack of papers from the envelope. "My mom told me about your situation with your parents. I've been dealing with something similar with them, and I thought you should know you're not their only target." My stomach dropped as she laid out email printouts, text messages, and bank statements. 2 years ago, after Jessica had graduated from medical school, my parents had contacted her, claiming they were her loving aunt and uncle who wanted to reconnect. They'd slowly worked their way into her life, and eventually the requests for money had begun. Small amounts at first, then larger sums for the same fabricated emergencies they'd used on me. "I almost fell for it," Jessica said, her voice shaky. "They were so convincing, so loving at first, but something felt off and I talked to my mom. She told me about what they'd done to her, to you, to other family members over the years. I confronted them and they turned vicious, just like they did with you." We spent hours comparing notes, and the pattern became horrifyingly clear. My parents had been running the same con on family members for decades, always targeting whoever had recently come into success or money. They'd refined their techniques over the years, learning exactly which emotional buttons to push, which stories garnered the most sympathy, which emergencies seemed most plausible. "Have there been others?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Jessica nodded. "Mom's been in touch with at least 4 other relatives who've been targeted. One cousin in Texas who started a successful construction business, an uncle in Florida who received a large inheritance, They all have similar stories: the love bombing, the gradual escalation of needs, the cruel mockery behind closed doors when they thought they were safe. The scope of my parents' deception was staggering. They'd built an entire lifestyle around exploiting family members' love and generosity. It wasn't just greed, it was a systematic pattern of abuse that had left damaged relationships and broken trust throughout our extended family. "We're thinking of having a family meeting," Jessica said. "Not with them, obviously, but with all their victims. Mom thinks it might be healing for everyone to share their experiences, to know they're not alone." I agreed immediately. The isolation had been one of the hardest parts of cutting them off, feeling like I was the only one who'd experienced this betrayal. Knowing there were others who understood, who'd lived through the same manipulation and emerged on the other side, felt like a gift I hadn't known I needed. The family meeting was scheduled for the following month, to be held at Patricia's home in Phoenix. In the weeks leading up to it, I found myself both anxious and excited. These were relatives I'd been kept from knowing, connections that had been severed to protect my parents' con game. Now, I had the chance to reclaim those relationships. Marcus drove with me to Phoenix, holding my hand during the moments when anxiety threatened to overwhelm me. "You're not going alone," he'd said simply when I'd told him about the meeting. "Family stuff is hard. You need backup." Patricia's home was warm and welcoming, so different from the cold calculation I'd grown up with. As relatives arrived, some I vaguely remembered, others complete strangers who shared my features, I was struck by the genuine warmth in their greetings. These people had all been painted as villains in my parents' narratives, but they were just regular people who'd refused to be exploited. We sat in Patricia's spacious living room, 12 of us in total, each carrying our own story of manipulation and betrayal. There was Robert, the cousin from Texas, who'd lost $50,000 to my parents before catching on. Maria, an elderly aunt who'd been convinced to co-sign loans that my parents had defaulted on, ruining her credit in her 70s. David, a second cousin who'd been promised partnership in a business venture that never existed, losing his entire savings. As each person shared their story, the patterns became undeniable. The medical emergencies that never quite matched the bills, the house repairs that were never actually done, the investments that somehow always failed, the gradual escalation from small requests to major financial commitments, and always, the discovery of mockery and contempt behind the facade of family love. "They called me the Golden Goose," Robert shared, his voice bitter. "Found that out when they accidentally forwarded me an email meant for each other. They were literally keeping spreadsheets of how much they could extract from each of us." My heart sank. Spreadsheets. They'd turned exploiting their family into a business model. Patricia stood up, her presence commanding attention. "I called this meeting not to dwell on our pain, but to reclaim our family. Helen and Richard," she refused to call them my parents, I noticed, "have spent decades keeping us apart, making us strangers to protect their schemes. But we're here now. We've survived their manipulation, and we can choose to build the family connections they tried to destroy." The meeting lasted well into the evening. We shared not just our stories of betrayal, but also our recovery. Several had been through therapy. Others had found healing through spiritual practices or support groups. Everyone had established firm boundaries and learned to recognize manipulation tactics. Most importantly, everyone had rebuilt their lives without the toxic influence of my parents. "The hardest part," Maria said softly, "was accepting that they never really loved me, that I was only valuable as long as I was useful. But you know what? Their inability to love says nothing about my worth. It only speaks to their emptiness." By the end of the meeting, we'd exchanged contact information and made plans to stay in touch. A family group chat was created, one based on genuine connection rather than exploitation. We even planned a reunion for the following summer, a chance to build the relationships that had been denied to us. That night in the hotel room, I broke down completely, not from sadness, but from a complex mix of validation, relief, and grief. Marcus held me as I sobbed, letting out years of pain I hadn't even known I was carrying. "They stole so much more than money?" I managed between sobs. "They stole an entire family from me, but you're getting it back," Marcus reminded me gently. "Maybe not the family you were born into, but the family that was always there, waiting for you to find them." He was right. From the ashes of my parents' deception, something beautiful was emerging. Real relationships with relatives who understood boundaries, who valued connection over transaction, who knew the cost of toxic family dynamics and chose healing instead. The drive back home was contemplative. I thought about the life I'd built, the family I'd found, the future stretching before me free from manipulation and exploitation. It hadn't been the journey I'd expected, but it had led me to a destination better than anything I could have imagined. A week after returning from Phoenix, I received an unexpected package. Inside was a photo album Patricia had compiled, filled with pictures of family gatherings I'd never been invited to, celebrations I'd missed, connections that had been hidden from me. A note was tucked inside. Dear Emma, these are the years they stole from us. But look at all the years we have ahead. Welcome to your real family. Love, Aunt Patricia. I spent hours going through the album, seeing cousins grow up, celebrating achievements, supporting each other through hardships. This was what family was supposed to look like. Not perfect, but present. Not transactional, but transformational. My therapy sessions with Dr. Martinez had evolved from crisis management to deep healing work. We explored how my parents' treatment had affected every aspect of my life, from my relationship with money to my ability to trust. Each session peeled back another layer, revealing patterns I'd unconsciously carried. You mentioned feeling uncomfortable when Marcus offers to pay for dinner, Dosser. Martinez noted during one session. Tell me more about that. It feels like a debt, I admitted. Like if I let him pay, I'll owe him something. I know logically that's not true, but the feeling is automatic. Your parents taught you that every gift came with strings attached. That generosity was always transactional. It makes sense that you'd be wary. But part of healing is learning to recognize genuine generosity and allowing yourself to receive it. It was slow work, rewiring decades of programming. But with each small victory, accepting a gift without anxiety, letting friends help without feeling indebted, receiving compliments without suspicion, I felt lighter. The holiday season arrived again, and this time I had invitations to 3 different family gatherings. Sarah's traditional celebration, Marcus's family's festive chaos, and a new tradition with my rediscovered relatives. I accepted all 3, marveling at how full my life had become once I'd stopped pouring everything into a bottomless pit. On Christmas Eve, as snow began falling outside my window, I received a text from an unknown number. The area code was familiar, my parents' town. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Emma, this is Mrs. Morrison. I wanted you to know that your parents moved away last month. The apartment was too expensive after your father's medical bills. They're living with some distant relatives in Ohio now. I thought you should know, in case it brings you peace. You did the right thing, dear. I see that now. I sat with that information, waiting for feelings that didn't come. No guilt, no sadness, no urge to reach out. Just a quiet acknowledgement that their story had continued without me, as mine had continued without them. They'd moved on to new targets, probably spinning tales of their ungrateful daughter to gain sympathy and support. But that wasn't my problem anymore. That evening, Marcus and I hosted our first holiday party in my new home. Friends and chosen family filled the spaces with laughter and warmth. Patricia and Jessica had flown in for the occasion, bringing other relatives I was still getting to know. The house glowed with genuine joy, the kind that couldn't be bought or manipulated into existence. As I stood in my kitchen, watching people I loved enjoying themselves in my space, Sarah appeared at my elbow. Look at you, she said softly. Look at this life you've built. I surveyed the scene, Marcus laughing with my cousins, Patricia helping set out desserts, friends from all areas of my life mixing and mingling. This was wealth that couldn't be deposited in a bank account. This was the return on investment for choosing myself, for recognizing my worth beyond my financial value. You know what the best part is? I said to Sarah. Nobody here wants anything from me except my company. Nobody's calculating what they can get. They're just here. Sarah squeezed my hand. That's what love looks like when it's real. As the party wound down and guests began leaving, each person hugged me goodbye with genuine affection. No hidden agendas, no mental calculations of what I might be good for. Just simple human connection, freely given and received. Later, as Marcus and I cleaned up together, he brought up something that had been on his mind. I've been thinking about the future, he said carefully. About maybe taking our relationship to the next level. But I want you to know that whatever happens between us, it will never be about money. We keep our finances separate if that makes you feel safer. We sign whatever agreements make you comfortable. I just want you, Emma. Not your success, not your bank account. Just you. Tears pricked my eyes. This was what I'd been unable to imagine when I was trapped in my family's web. That someone could love me without calculating my monetary value. That I could be worth more than what I could provide. I love you too, I said, realizing I'd never said those words without them being used against me. With Marcus, they were just truth, simple and uncomplicated. As the year drew to a close, I found myself in a reflective mood. The journey from that rainy April night to this snowy December evening had been transformative. I'd lost a family but found my tribe. I'd stopped being an ATM and discovered I was a whole person worthy of genuine love and respect. My business was thriving beyond my wildest dreams. My relationship with Marcus was healthy and growing. My connection with my rediscovered relatives was healing old wounds I hadn't even known existed. My friendships were deep and reciprocal. My relationship with money had transformed from one of guilt and obligation to one of empowerment and choice. The girl who'd been groomed from childhood to be a financial resource for others had grown into a woman who understood her intrinsic value. The family ATM had been permanently decommissioned, replaced by a human being who knew that love shouldn't cost anything but emotional investment and genuine care. As midnight approached on New Year's Eve, I stood on my deck despite the cold, looking up at a sky cleared of clouds after the snow. The stars were brilliant, each one a reminder of how vast the universe was beyond the small, manipulative world I'd escaped. Somewhere out there, my parents were probably running their con on new victims. Tyler was likely still blaming others for his problems, and their lives continued in patterns they seemed unwilling or unable to break. But here, in my own space, surrounded by people who loved me for myself, I had found something they would never understand. True wealth that had nothing to do with bank accounts and everything to do with authentic human connection. The price of freedom had been high, but the return on investment was immeasurable. As fireworks began exploding across the city skyline, marking the beginning of another year, I didn't make resolutions or wishes. I simply stood in gratitude for the hard-won wisdom that had brought me to this moment. Every tear, every difficult boundary, every moment of doubt had led here, to a life lived on my own terms, surrounded by people who saw my worth beyond my wallet. The family ATM was closed forever, and in its place stood Emma Reynolds, entrepreneur, friend, partner, cousin, and survivor. I had learned the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from those who can only see you as a resource to be exploited. And in that walking away, in that choosing of self over manipulation, I had found my way home.